Today we're going to learn about some different concepts about angles. So we're going to start with talking about sketching angles. And so I'm just going to give you some examples of sketching angles. And so the first example, if we have some axes, and so if we have this angle right here, and so this angle falls in quartile 1, and so some arrows on there, and so this side here is our terminal side. And this side here is our initial side. And so this angle that I just sketched is actually, I meant to give this to you first, is a 45-degree angle. And so you always start at your initial side and then you go up the amount of degrees that you're going to your terminal side. So that creates a 45-degree angle right in there. Example 2, if we have a 225-degree angle, so if each quarter of this is 90 degrees, and because they create the 90-degree angles, so that means to get to 225, we're going 180 degrees, and then 45 degrees more. So our terminal side is going to be right here. And then we always have our initial side over here. And then the arrow that you need to draw is going to start at your initial side and go around to your terminal side. And so remember, this is your initial side. And this is your terminal side. And so this angle here is falling in our third quadrant. Example 3, if we have a 405-degree angle, so 405 degrees, we're going to end up going all the way 360 degrees around, and then we're going 45 degrees more. So we're going to be ending right here, and our initial side's always right here. However, when we draw our arrow around, we're going 360 degrees and then an additional 45 degrees. And so this terminal side is going to fall in quadrant 1. And so remember that we have our terminal side right here. And we have our initial side right here. And then example 4, if we have negative 135 degrees, we usually move counterclockwise around it in order to do a positive angle. So to do a negative angle, we're going to move clockwise around our circle. So we need to go negative 135, which is 90, and then 45 degrees more. So we're going to go this way, 135 degrees. So our terminal side's over here. Our initial side's always on this axis there. And we're moving clockwise, so our arrow with our circle goes right here. Our terminal side is falling in quadrant 3. And then remember you have your initial side right here. And you have your terminal side over here. The next piece we're going to look at is reference angles. So there's a couple things for reference angles that you should keep in mind. And the first is that it's the smallest angle. Here, I'll put it is the smallest angle for you. It is the smallest angle between the terminal side and the x-axis. And then the second piece you want to remember is that it's always going to be 90 degrees or less and positive. So now let's do some examples. And so the first example is if we want to find the reference angle of 30 degrees. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to draw a 30-degree angle. And so since we just learned how to do that, that should be kind of easy maybe. So a 30-degree angle is going to end somewhere around here. Remember, it always starts down here. And so this angle measures 30 degrees. And so the reference angle is our smallest angle between the terminal side and the x-axis. So remember, this is your terminal side. And so we need the smallest angle between there and the x-axis, so that's going to be right here, which is also a 30-degree angle. And so that tells us that our reference angle is 30 degrees. Example 2, if we have negative 120 degrees, again, we want to start by drawing ourselves an angle. So negative 120 degrees is going to be clockwise negative 120, so that's going to be somewhere around here is where it will end. And so again, it's the smallest angle between our terminal side and our x-axis. This is our terminal side, and so we want to go from that terminal side to the closest spot of the x-axis, which is right here. And so if we were to continue past our angle, that would end up getting us to negative 180 degrees over there. So we want to determine from negative 120 degrees to negative 180 degrees, how far did we go? Well, we went 60 degrees. So that tells us that our reference angle is 60 degrees. And then example 3, if we have 480 degrees, the first thing we want to do is draw out that angle. And so 480 degrees, that's going to go 120 degrees past 360. So it's going to end right about here. Always starts here. But we're going to go 360 degrees and then the 120 degrees around. And so that gives us the 480 degrees that we needed to go. And so we want to think, how far are we from the terminal side right here to the x-axis? So it's this angle right there. And so if we were to go from 360 over here, if we went all the way around, and then go another 180 degrees around, that's going to get us to 540 degrees. So we want to determine how far is it from the 480 degrees to the 540 degrees. And so we could say, you could do subtraction for this if you wanted, 450 or 540 minus 480. And you get 60, so that tells you that your reference angle is 60 degrees right there. And then the last piece we're going to talk about angles today is coterminal angles. And so coterminal angles, there's some notes you want to take about them. So coterminal angles are two angles with the same initial and terminal sides. And then the second piece is to find these coterminal angles. You always want to add or subtract 360 degrees or 2 pi. And so whether or not you use 360 degrees or 2 pi is going to depend on if your angle is in degrees or in radians. So now let's do some examples. And so example 1 says find find a coterminal angle between 0 degrees and 360 degrees. And so part A of this is if we are given the angle 733 degrees, we want to try to find a coterminal angle between 0 and 360 degrees. So we're going to determine first, is 733 larger than 360 or is it less than 0? Well, it's larger than 360, so that means we need to subtract to get to a value between 360. So we're going to do 733 minus 360, and that gives us 373 degrees, which is still not between 0 and 360. So we need to subtract 360 again. So we're going to do 373 minus 360 again, and we end up getting 13 degrees. So that tells us that our coterminal angle between 0 and 360 is 13 degrees. The second part to this question is we're going to do 562 degrees. And so it's larger than 360, so we need to do 562 minus 360, and that gives you 202 degrees, and that is between 0 and 360, so that would be your coterminal angle that you're looking for. All right, question 2 is going to be find one positive and one negative coterminal angle. All right, so A is if we are given negative 100 degrees. So we need to find one positive and one negative. So that means we're going to have to add and subtract here. So I'm going to start with adding, and so we're going to start with doing negative 100 plus 360, and that gives us 260 degrees. And so this 260 degrees here, that's our one positive coterminal angle. And so that's just one possible answer for a positive coterminal angle, because if you continue to add 360 to this, then you're going to get other positive coterminal angles. But since there's no point in adding 360 more than once here, why do that? So then we find our negative coterminal angle. So we do negative 100 minus 360, and so that right there is going to give me negative 460 degrees. And so this negative 460 degrees is my one negative coterminal angle that I needed. And again, you could continue to subtract 360 and get other negative coterminal angles, but why do more work than you have to? So I stop there. And then B, if we're given 52 degrees, again, I'm going to start with adding. So I'm going to do negative 100, oops, sorry, I'm copying from above for some reason. So we're going to do 52 plus 360. And so that's going to give me 412 degrees. And so that right there is my positive coterminal angle that I needed. Now I'm going to subtract, so 52 minus 360 degrees, and that's going to give me negative 308 degrees, and that right there is my negative coterminal angle that I needed. Example 3. Says find a coterminal angle between 0 and 2 pi. And I'll write in pi here. And so A is if we are given 12 pi over 5, we need to find ourselves a coterminal angle between 0 and 2 pi. So we need to first determine, is 12 pi over 5 larger than 2 pi or smaller than 0? Well, it's not negative, so we know it's not smaller than 0. So then we're going to look at the 12 over 5. If we did 12 divided by 5, we would get 2.4, which is larger than 2, so that means it's larger than 2 pi. So we need to subtract 2 pi from this. So we're going to do 12 pi over 5 minus, I'm going to write it as 2 pi over 1 so that we have fractions. So here, we then need to get a common denominator when we are subtracting fractions. So this has a denominator of 5, and this has a denominator of 1. So I can get from 1 to 5 by multiplying by 5. So I'm going to multiply this by 5 over 5. And the reason I do 5 over 5 is because 5 over 5 is equal to 1. And if you multiply a number by 1, you do not change the value of that number. So then that gives me 12 pi over 5 minus 10 pi over 5. And so when you do that, you now do 12 pi minus 10 pi. That gives you 2 pi. Bring the 5s all the way over, so it's 2 pi over 5. And this would be your answer. And then B, if we have negative 2 pi over 3, we need to determine if that's greater than 2 pi or less than 0. Well, it's negative, so that tells us it's less than 0. So we're going to want to add 2 pi to this. So if we have negative 2 pi over 3, we want to add, I'm going to again write 2 pi over 1. We have a 3 here and a 1 here. We can get from 1 to 3 by multiplying by 3. So we're going to multiply this by 3 over 3. And so that gives us negative 2 pi over 3 plus 6 pi over 3, which ends up giving us 4 pi over 3, and that would be between 0 and 2 pi. So that would be your answer. And then example 4 is find one positive and one negative coterminal angle. And so A is 11 pi over 4. And so we want to find one positive, which we're going to add, or we could subtract, whichever you prefer. So if you think about it, if we 11 over 4, this fraction right here, 11 over 4, is greater than 2, which means 11 pi over 4 is greater than 2 pi. So we could just subtract and still have a positive answer. So in this case, I'm going to just subtract. So I'm going to say 11 pi over 4 minus 2 pi over 1. We can get, this is 4 and this is 1. We can get there by multiplying by 4. So we're going to multiply this by 4 over 4. So we get 11 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4. And that gives us 3 pi over 4. And so this 3 pi over 4 is our positive coterminal angle. And this follows the same thing as with the degrees, is that this is just one of infinite coterminal angles that are positive. So you could have added 2 pi instead of subtracted and still gotten a different positive coterminal angle. So now we need a negative coterminal angle though, so I'm going to continue to subtract. So I'm actually going to take this 3 pi over 4 and bring it down here. And so we're going to do 3 pi over 4 minus 2 pi again. So again, this is a 4, this is a 1. We can get from 1 to 4 by multiplying by 4. So we multiply this by 4 over 4. And so we get 3 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, which gives us negative 5 pi over 4. And that negative 5 pi over 4 creates our negative coterminal angle. And again, you could keep subtracting and get more negative coterminal angles, but why do more work than you have to? And then B is if we have 5 pi over 4. And again, we want one positive and one negative coterminal angle. So I'm going to start as 5 over 4 is between 0 and 2 pi. So if we subtract, we automatically get a negative angle. So we're going to want to add for a positive and then subtract for a negative here. So we're going to say 5 pi over 4 plus 2 pi over 1. This is 4, this is 1. We can multiply by 4, so 4 over 4 is 5 pi over 4 plus 8 pi over 4, which gives us 13 pi over 4. And that's our positive. Now we can find our negative by subtracting. So 5 pi over 4 minus 2 pi over 1. And so we can actually note that 2 pi over 1 is already 8 pi over 4. Those are the same, we already found that. So we can just say 5 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4 gives us negative 3 pi over 4. And this negative 3 pi over 4 is our